ועכשיו, לכבוד האורחת שלנו, אני אעבור לאנגלית. It's an enormous pleasure and a great honor to welcome our guest speaker, our keynote for this conference, Professor Mihu Tagoma. I don't want to take any time from her lecture. You can read her short bio in the little booklet. She's leading. She's a main analyst for the OECD and the leader of the Education 2030. And one could not have dreamt of a better keynote speaker, better positioned keynote speaker for this gathering. So allow me to welcome you formally again, as Anat and Miri did, Professor Mihu Tagoma.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Mihu Tagoma. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And this is actually the very first time for me to visit Israel. And Israel is very active. It's unfortunate that the ministry representative have left, but they are very eager to reform curriculum, which I know. And luckily, I have wonderful committee members who invited me. So in other OECD countries too, it is a general trend that it's no longer the ministry people or the curriculum agency write the curriculum because, for example, British Columbia, Canada, they know curriculum is just a paper. So they already involve the voices, players who will be implementing the curriculum in the design process. And I could see that this is happening. And OECD as well, we are intergovernmental organization. So I am sure you will imagine I am sitting in the office only talking to the government. No. So at least in this project, we are trying to innovate our own working method, which you will see. So for my presentation first, I'd like to give you a brief background of the project for those people who don't know about the project. And then I would like to share with you some of the key findings we already have. One is phase one. One is the learning framework. We call it Learning Compass 2030. And this really highlights the same concept that we heard from this morning. It's really the students who need to navigate themselves through the world of complexity, ambiguity, and ever-changing world. So we use the word analogy of learning compass. And in parallel, learning compass is like a vision of what kind of competencies students need, but that needs to be incorporated into curriculum. So in parallel, we are conducting curriculum analysis. And then finally, we are already moving towards phase two, which is about pedagogies, assessment, teacher education, which we heard. So we are very aligned, you can see already. So the background. Back in 2015, so you can see all these dialogues with various stakeholders takes forever, but it's worth it. So Education Policy Committee, which is the highest body of education representatives at the OECD from member countries, met and agreed. The first, we really need to step back and explore the bigger picture and long-term challenges facing education, because if there are some issues like school bullying or teenage suicide, policymakers became so busy with everyday immediate needs, and they may be losing the long-term visions about the impact of artificial intelligence, the big ideas, and so on. So first strand of activity is creating this conceptual learning to identify what kind of competencies students need. And in parallel, as I said, the curriculum design process has been always ideological and political, and some of the decisions made by adults are negatively impacting the students. So countries ask the OECD to support them to make the process of curriculum more evidence-based and systematic so that students will benefit from the decision about the curriculum. And Education Policy Committee also agreed that in phase 1, which is until last year, we will be looking at the what questions, what kind of competencies they need to shape a better future themselves. And then we will look into how questions, how to design the learning environment and pedagogies and assessment, as I said. And this is very important. Education Policy Committee also agreed that our OECD's work has no relationship with the prescription of national curricula. Just as our ministry colleague said, yes, we are in your big ecosystem picture. OECD is sitting somewhere, and we don't want to influence negatively. So we are supporting, but we are not influencing any of the prescription. But I'm very grateful that we appeared somewhere, not ignored. And at the same time, we seek to establish common language about competency. And the committee chair already mentioned about the taxonomies and complexity. And also, people really want to learn from each other because they face similar challenges. So we try to provide a shared space where we can actually explore issues together about the design of instructional systems. So that's the background. And for strand 1, concept making, where are we? So a few of you actually joined our meeting in May to launch the Learning Compass. And we really did a lot of literature reviews and concept making, but in an iterative process with the multi-stakeholders. So as I said, this is the largest OECD room. We combined 2 rooms together because our Education 2030 is becoming more and more popular among OECD countries. But here, we wanted to make sure that this is not the government only. As I said, the academics' contribution is very important, but also we invited the teachers, school leaders, municipality leaders, and most importantly, students. And interestingly, students' voice really give us a lot of insight. We should not underestimate that they have a voice and they do have some good ideas which we may not have. So I explained this. And also why we involve them, because OECD, as I said, we sit there, right? But sometimes some people misunderstand the role of OECD, so we go ahead and do research ourselves and assess student competencies with PISA and so on. So at least for 2030, we want to make sure we work with the stakeholders. So this is why if you want to go far, go alone, OECD, we were told. But if you want to go far, go together with us. The stakeholders told us, so we decided to go together. Thank you very much. And for curriculum analysis, we have a policy survey to map all the countries' curriculum, where they are going, and also curriculum content mapping. This is the first time ever an instrument to compare and contrast countries, how countries embed so-called 21st century competencies into existing subjects. And also we have in-depth curriculum analysis. One is mathematics, where we have many colleagues, a few colleagues here already involved, and physical education, highlighting the importance of health and well-being of the students, not only cognitive. And we plan to launch a report later this year or early next year. So the highlight of one of the deliverables, OECD Learning Framework. So the policy context, when it started back in 2015, there was a term which became quite popular, calling VUCA world, suggesting that the world is becoming more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And OECD at the same time, and thank you very much, you mentioned about the OECD well-being, and around that time, we were actually changing the OECD's mandate itself we have been shifting our growth narrative from economic growth to inclusive growth. So in the past, we have collected a lot of indicators around the material richness, such as jobs and income and housing, like GDP, GDP per capita, employment rates, and so on. But with the well-being framework, we start to collect the indicators such as work-life balance, safety, life satisfaction, health, civic engagement, environment, education, and community. So we are looking at well-being as multi-dimensional concept. It's not only economic well-being only, but social development is very important for OECD's nation state. And on top of that, we are taking an approach that these are the well-being not only for the nations, but at the individual level too. And just to give you some of the mega trends towards 2030 around this well-being, for example, environment, natural disaster become more and more commonplace. Unfortunately, we do have natural disasters, but no matter how many times we experience, including my original country, Japan, with the Fukushima incident, but the education sector always get panic. So how can we respond to such cases in a better way towards 2030? And renewable energy is rising, but not fast enough. And we have witnessed the student voice from Sweden actually started to create a global movement to take actions to respond to the environmental issues. And looking at the community indicator, increasing migration towards the developed world. So you can see as part of your, part of the OECD member countries, so you are more the attracting, the attracting side of the country, especially with the startups and people come and join you. An average age in OECD going up, including your country. So what will be the implications of the age structure for the new generation to cope with in the future? And overweight and obesity, this is a health indicator among children. So I understand that you are not as aged rapidly as we are, but among your children, the obesity proportion is on the rise. So implication for your curriculum is who should really enhance the health literacy of children. And growing income inequality in many countries, including your country too. Unfortunately, many OECD countries are experiencing the Gini coefficients increasing. And this growing inequality invites other social frustrations. So how can we make sure that our today's and future young children will be able to change the dynamic and thinking critically about the future of our societies. And on civic engagement side, fewer people are engaged in their democracy, again, including your country too, but in many OECD countries. So when we looked at the voter turnout, unfortunately, the people start to lose trust in the institutional voting. And when we broke down the rate by the elderly people and the prime working group and the young people are less likely to go. So how can we encourage the students to actually take part in the civic activities? And global increase, I am sure I don't have to mention this to you, but coming from France too, that some incidents in the past, it was more like a Hollywood movie incident, but today we really need to be agile every day. And the security is important for young children as well. And when it comes to security, it's not about the big global issue, but also everyday life, whether people feel safety, walking alone at night. And you can see that in your case, it's slightly less than OECD average, but yes, people do feel are not safe working alone. So how can we work together, not only the students' generation, but our generation too? This is a general trend. The security is at risk in many OECD countries. And what about technology? Yes, rapid technology is on the rise with a lot of social medias and so on. And implications for this technological instrument is for children. There are some new trends that didn't exist in our generation, such as cyberbullying. And this is becoming more and more articulated in many OECD countries. And that would require every student to have a solid ethical foundations from early years. And another side of the technological advancement is the emerging technologies change the landscape of the future jobs. I am sure you have heard a lot about the Oxford Martin School's team suggesting that 47% of the jobs will disappear, or from the US, the jobs that exist today will no longer exist when the primary school children go into the labor market. So there are a lot of job market analysis at the OECD too. But the good news is there are some emerging new jobs as well. So it would be important for today's children not to think about only being employed by others, but creating new jobs themselves as well. And another implication for you to think about the changes of the technology is changes in the demands for skills. So for example, this is actually the demand analysis from the US market. But this would apply to many other countries too. So the skills such as routine and manual, and non-routine and manual, anything manual, could be easily replaced by machine, so the demands are on the decrease. Actually, this is threatening for OECD as well, because routine cognitive. So even though it is a cognitive skills, but it is routine, it is even more likely to be replaced by machine. Because if it is routine, it is easier to turn them into algorithm. I'm sure the mathematics experts will agree. So it is really at risk. So if it is routine cognitive, even though we talk about the importance of cognitive, but what types of cognitive skills are important? This is implications for us. On the other hand, the analysis suggests that non-routine, so that artificial intelligence won't be able to imitate either, and also analytic. So cognitive but non-routine is on the rise in the labor market. And also non-routine and interpersonal. This is something that artificial intelligence even are not as good as we are, at least until the singularity may or may not happen. So this really gives us a food for thought to think deeper, what kind of cognitive skills, what kind of non-cognitive skills today's students will need when they grow up. So here is a sense of urgency for change. Looking back about the technology and education race analyzed by professors from Harvard. So at the time of the Industrial Revolution, of course, technology went ahead where education was behind. Then the society as a whole experienced a social pain, which is not good. And at that time, education caught up with the universal public schooling so that everybody can be literate, everybody will have the base. Then, luckily, the society as a whole will experience a prosperity. Now we are facing the time of digital revolution. So if we don't catch up with this technological advancement, then the period of social pain will last. And who will be marginalized by this digital revolution? The disadvantaged children. So it is very important for us to work together to make this shift as quickly as possible so that all children will benefit from digital revolution rather than resulting in digital divide. So this is a sense of urgency that we talk about. Now, the learning compass. So in the, sorry, on the top is Japanese. It's my former presentation I gave in Japan too, but the message is the same. So in 2030, as I said, it's a holistic well-being. And to achieve this, students need to be able to act rather than being acted upon, and being shaped and shaping themselves rather than being shaped, and making responsible decisions themselves rather than simply passively accepting decisions made by others. But student agency is not the same as student autonomy or student choice. The concept of student agency is much wider, and also it is in the context. So we highlight the importance of co-agency because students exist, study, learn, and live in relation with teachers, peers, parents, and community as part of the ecosystem. So it is very important to recognize that the value of the interactive and mutually supportive relationships students can have in the classroom, in community, at home, with their teachers and peers and parents, towards their shared goals. So our learning compass really places students at the center, and therefore we do listen to students' voice too in our project. But that said, a little caution about not misinterpreting the concept of student agency. Student agency does not mean, as I said, student autonomy, they can choose whatever they want, because this is actually PISA. So luckily, this is not the country ranking. So you can see that PISA can have other types of analysis, which is helpful for you. And this really is a very good food for thought, because when we compared the advantaged students and disadvantaged students and what kind of pedagogy would be beneficial for them, and one of the pedagogy let students decide on their own learning procedures. It sounds good, like learning autonomy, but actually the statistically, this really shows a negative. So this pedagogy is beneficial for advantaged students, but not so for disadvantaged students. So that implies disadvantaged students will need a lot of support and structured strategic support by teachers, implying that, again, the importance of teacher education and professional development. And another key concept of our learning compass is competency is a holistic and dynamic concept covering the knowledge, skills, and attitudes and values. Oftentimes, 21st century competencies are misunderstood as, or equally used as 21st century skills, but competency is a wider concept than just skills. In the area of knowledge, in line with Anat mentioned, it is important to acknowledge the value of disciplinary knowledge that will continue in 2030. But at the same time, interdisciplinary knowledge is increasingly important, as well as epistemic knowledge. And also procedural knowledge is increasingly valued by many countries, such as system thinking patterns and design thinking patterns as a knowledge. When it comes to skills, it is important to acknowledge not only cognitive, but increasingly metacognitive skills are highlighted as important, which is very difficult for artificial intelligence to imitate at this stage, and socio-emotional skills, and practical and physical. And increasingly, attitudes and values are highlighted as important, important aspects of competency, not only by humanity experts, but even from artificial intelligence experts as well, because it is really human intelligence and human qualities to be able to make good judgment with the right attitudes and values. And on top of this, we highlight the importance of core foundations. As I said, without core foundations, students cannot exercise their student agency. And therefore, we first highlight the importance of literacy, language development, and numeracy. That should start from early childhood, which earlier the ministry representative mentioned too. But as a core foundations, cognitive foundations is not enough. So socio-emotional foundations should be rooted in the core students' core foundations. And also, as I said, the health is often forgotten, but increasingly in the digital world, when students navigate themselves in the digital space, we do see research where their health and mental health and physical health is on the risk. And on top of this, in addition to digital literacy, which is already highlighted in your report, the data literacy has been highlighted as part of core foundations in our OECD discussions, because it's not only digital, but with the arrival of the big data, there will be more and more visualized or just statistical data to be part of everyday text in 2030. So once again, if all students will not be able to, will not be data literate, there will be a disadvantaged students that will be the ones that will be exploited by distorted data, marketing, the sales, and so on. So this is why it's important that with the big data, it's not only data scientists or data analytics that is needed as a specialized occupations, but it is very important that all children be data literate. And when I say this, it doesn't mean that you need to create more and more subjects, but what other countries are doing is they can embed these foundational literacies into existing curriculum. So this is ICT and digital literacy are embedded in either national languages or humanities or even mathematics. So depending on which country, they make different choice, and there's no one size fit for all. So different countries make different choices, and that's okay. But the key is that don't add any more subject, but try to embed it in the existing subject in order to avoid curriculum overload. And another aspect of our learning compass is transformative competencies, and including the taking responsibility, creating new value, reconciling tensions and dilemma. Because, for example, creating new value, and this value could be new services, new product, new ways of thinking, new ways of living, so anything new. So as I said, today's children are expected to create something new, going beyond our generation, not just trying to fit themselves in the existing institutions or establishment. And one of the reasons is, as I said, the artificial intelligence can do many things following the algorithm and pattern, but creativity is something that they are still struggling. And this is analysis done by this Oxford Martin School too. The important or creative tasks are unlikely to be replaced by artificial intelligence in the future too. And another important competency for making or shaping a new future is taking responsibility. Because innovations, not all innovations are good to mankind or to the environment, like chemical weapon, for example. So it is very important when students are trying to create new knowledge, something new, they really need to make responsible decisions. So it is increasingly important that all children can take responsibility. And also creativity can always present some dilemmas and tensions, just as science always challenge ethics too, and ethics are challenged by scientific research and new knowledge as well, it is important that reconciling tensions and dilemmas is part of the competencies that students can actually acquire instead of avoiding tensions and dilemmas. But they need to be bold and learn how to read complex context, which, once again, artificial intelligence is not good at, which is reading complex context. So this remains as human intelligence and human qualities. And on top of this, as we all know, these competencies cannot be developed just by sitting in the classroom and just reading or passively listening to teachers. And therefore, our countries have suggested competency development cycle, starting from the anticipating, hypothesizing, and actually taking actions, but always reflecting. So it's like PDCA cycle in the business world, but in the education sector, this is much more than just PDCA. So that based on these learning compass, on our curriculum analysis, we have been looking at 6 curriculum issues. I already touched a little bit about the issue of curriculum overload, but besides this, countries said, well, there's a time lag between today's curriculum and also even today's actual society, but even more so with the future needs. How can we reconcile this today's needs and today's curriculum and future needs? Another issue other countries are facing is equity issue. Yes, it's easy to innovate curriculum by flip classroom or digital textbook, but research does say innovative curriculum, just as student agency, is beneficial for advantaged students, but not disadvantaged students. So how can we ensure equity while innovating curriculum? And another issue is managing curriculum flexibility and autonomy. And there is a general trend to give more flexibility and more autonomy to schools and municipalities and even to the classroom level to teachers. And research, what we see from research is, yes, that's great in municipalities or schools, in classroom where teachers know how to use that flexibility, autonomy for the best of the students. But when municipalities or school leaders or teachers don't know, then it will be the students who get penalized of the lack of the capacity. So again, how can we actually ensure all students will benefit from flexibility and autonomy? And another issue is embedding values into curriculum, which I don't see any issue here. You already have very value-based, but some countries, it is illegal, for example, in Denmark, to embed value in curriculum, while they do specify values in Education Act, but not in curriculum. And planning for effective implementation, yes, as I said, curriculum is just a paper, so oftentimes we say curriculum is written curriculum and taught curriculum, implemented curriculum, or achieved curriculum, or attained curriculum. We separate 3 different levels of curriculum: paper, and what's happening in the classroom, and what students are actually learning. So it's very important that we look at 3 aspects. And just to give you one example of curriculum overload of analysis due to the interest of the time, this is very interesting. I would invite everybody to think. So this is, again, PISA. It's not country ranking, right? But some food for thought. So we looked at the time, learning time at school, in blue. I add study time after school. So if we hypothesize, the more is better. If you often fight, or we can't decrease the number of mathematics or language because they need this time, but let's think harder. The performance of these students look like this. So this gives us the more is not necessarily better. It's interesting, no? So in case of Israel, you're not that bad. But for example, Finland, the students in Finland don't study as much in the curriculum, but they do perform better. So So this is not ranking, but this is the food for thought. Okay, we really need to think about the quality of learning time, moving away from quantity of the learning time. So this is a challenge for all countries. And of course, the caveat is, of course, PISA is measuring only one part of the student outcomes. So it's not the only answer, but this is a good food for thought. Let's think about the quality of learning time, because there are a lot of emerging demands like global competency, financial literacy, entrepreneurship. We heard computational thinking, media literacy after fake news. There are so many. And to be fair for government officials, it's easier to add, because there are lots of fights among all these people, right? But actually, research says students often lack sufficient time even to master key disciplinary concepts. They don't have enough time. And also, in the interest of the balanced life, students need to nurture friendship, and to sleep, and to exercise, to perform better. So this is why we, OECD countries, are thinking harder to shift the focus about the students from more hours to quality learning time to allow deeper learning. Because interestingly, as I said, we have many stakeholders. So the government group was saying, yes, I know, we know, but actually removing contents, it's not possible. That's what government said. And at the school level, which is focus group 2, they say, well, but I understand it's the curriculum overload for students, but in school, every time curriculum change, we see innovation overload. It's too much for us to keep changing and introduce to new pedagogies. It's not only for students curriculum overload, but pedagogy overload. That's what teachers said. And students said, well, you know, Miho and OECD, school is a place not only for studying, but also making friends. Don't you remember any friends from your school today? So all of us kept quiet. Yes, you're right. So you can see, sometimes students' perspectives help us to rethink about what is it, the goals of education and the purpose of school. School is for whom? Students. And this is another interesting findings about curriculum flexibility and autonomy. And as we were listening to your speech, which are quite in line with us, our analysis too, because giving flexibility about contents, it's too risky. So it is usually none or low. Whereas giving flexibility to teaching method and assessment, so teaching method is high and medium on assessment because it's a high stake. So this is what other countries are doing. And implications for policymakers is political economy of reform is really high to give flexibility to content level about the discipline. So, for example, if the municipality or school decided, okay, our school don't need to teach mathematics. So it's too risky for children in that school not learning mathematics. So it is very important that at the content, giving the degree of flexibility given to school is different on the content or teaching method or assessment. We can't really mix them all to think about giving flexibility. And when we actually decide to remove contents, of course, as government said, it's so politically high stake, it's very difficult. But for the sake of the student, we have to. And some of the principles that countries are using is focus. So no mile-wide, inch-deep type of curriculum, but focus with big ideas, as the committee chair was mentioning. Another is rigor. When you remove, usually there is a big debate, like in Portugal, removing will lower the standards. So we need to make sure removing the types of content will not lower the standards. We keep a good rigor. So what kind of contents can go will be decided by that rigor. And coherence, which is already in your report, so I don't have to repeat. And this is another example of more is not better. So recently, because of the financial crisis, there are a lot of pressure from the stakeholders to increase the number of hours to teach financial literacy. So OECD had measured the financial literacy. And there's no correlation between the number of students who actually had the financial literacy for at least 2 years, which is on this side, or the actual performance. There is no correlation. So again, the message is the more is not necessarily better. And once again, financial literacy too, different countries actually embed financial literacy in existing curriculum rather than creating a new subject. And as you can see, countries really make different choices. So financial literacy, some countries combine it more with humanities, whereas other countries combine it more with mathematics and other subjects. So there's no one right answer because each country has different constituents of the students and also already existing curriculum. So it's up to you to think about how to embed new demands into the existing curriculum. And finally, very quickly, the brief introduction of phase 2 of our project. So strand 1, we will continue concept making. So in line with the learning for 2030, we need to think about teacher profile, teaching and teacher competency for 2030. And for our curriculum analysis, we will be shifting from curriculum design to curriculum implementations. And countries agreed to focus on 3 priority implementation issues. One is look at the curriculum change as part of a larger ecosystem, larger change management. It's not that you change one thing and everything will be rosy, but you need to make sure what needs to be changed in what order to make the successful curriculum implementation. And the second is, as you already mentioned, the aligning the changes in the curriculum for students and changes in the pedagogies and assessment. And another one is when you make changes in the curriculum, the initial teacher education curriculum and programs and also professional development to support current teachers will need to be changed. So this alignment is important. So we already launched May 22nd, and another reports are coming up. As I said, curriculum design, redesign, maybe by the end of this year or early next year, and implementation, we just started, so 2 years later, and subject-specific report, physical education by the end of this year, and mathematics curriculum 2020. So thank you very much.
So, we have a few minutes for questions. Do you want to put your headset on, and then people can ask anything? אז אפשר לשאול באנגלית או בעברית, ויש לנו כ10 דקות. אני לא רואה. בבקשה.
My name is Rigor Shapiro.
Can you tell?
It does, okay. I have to kiss it, okay. My name is Yigal Shapiro. You made a small remark about negative feedback from teachers and what it could make. I never heard any other speaker talking about self-esteem, the positive success experience.
Could you repeat? I was listening to
Hebrew translation.
They couldn't translate from English to English, okay. You made a small remark about negative feedback of teachers and what it could make. I don't recall any saying from any other lecturer today anything about self-esteem, about positive success experience, the flight and fright syndrome. And your short bio shows that you did focus on, I don't know if toddlers or preschool. Now, those in 20-30 students are now in the kindergarten. So how come the program stated by the OECD states that from 2019 and so on, it will focus only on those who are 15 years old now and not about fixing urgently, maybe emergency. The approach in kindergartens to, I would call it, wash their brains, knowing that as many mistakes they can do and get rewarded for it, etc., etc.
Yeah. Okay.
So I believe the focus of my question was understood.
Okay, so on the first point, yes, I did not go into too much detail about the concept of student agency due to the interest of the time, because I wanted to cover broadly, but actually the concept of student agency can be decomposed into key constructs, varying from self-efficacy, growth mindset, motivation, and identity. So all of these positive traits are closely associated with the concept of student agency, which I introduced.
What about the program dealing with the raw materials that is now in kindergarten?
Yes.
The program speaks only about 2030.
Okay, so our framework is called learning. And we know from brain research, learning starts from 0, or even the brain is formed when a baby is in mother's tummy. So learning means from -0 to forever. It's a lifelong learning. But as I said, it's the curriculum analysis that we are doing in school. We focused on the secondary education for curriculum analysis, but our learning framework should imply and applicable for kindergarten to primary and secondary and even higher education, because we modeled after the New Zealand participants, suggesting their curriculum starting from 0 until adult education. So there should be concept, should be coherent regardless of which age.
Thank you.
But
yes.
Thank you for a good question.
Can you hear me like that?
Yes.
So I'll do it just out loud. I was wondering about the critical aspect of 2030 work. You mentioned at the end being a bit critical about wanting to cover like maybe too much learning subjects. I was wondering if there are more critical aspects of the work with countries and educational systems.
Yes, so 6 issues I introduced are the critical issues. So one is too much is a curriculum overload. So another one is a time lag. So will today's curriculum match with the students when they grow up? Is there a time lag or not, for example? And ensuring equity when innovating. So these are the 6 priority issues, critical issues.
Yeah, okay, so you consider them as the critical issues when...
Yes.
My name is Aviv Yust. I'm from Avnei Rosha Institute, and I wanted to ask if you thought about the role of the principals in this change. What is their roles? How they have to manage? Okay.
Yes, the role of principals vary from country to country because the governance structure is different across different countries. But that said, school leaders leadership is critically important in almost all countries, because we know from many teachers survey that one teacher cannot change the school culture or ethos or for all students. So students with one teacher who is good are lucky, but students who are not in this classroom with teachers who can't really implement should not be penalized. And it is the school principal who can ensure and encourage all teachers to be able to implement. And again, as part of the ecosystem, school leaders are also human too. They have challenges too. So municipalities can actually support school leaders too. So we know from research that student well-being is closely related to teacher well-being, and teacher well-being can be supported by school principals. So everything is connected. So it is very important to see issues as everybody's issue, not just, oh, teacher's issue or school principals or students. So the concept of shared responsibility and the concept of ecosystem is very important.
My name is Oved. My name is Rita Sever from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And my question is, do you have any special references to religious education, whether they are religious schools or religious education in schools or out of schools? I didn't hear any reference at all.
Yes, so due to the sensitivity and also due to the country's different priorities, this was not chosen to be part of the scope of this study. Okay.
So, thank you so very much.